We recording now?
Now it's being recorded. I'm sorry.
Well,
If you don't
I
mind
didn't make
stepping
a reply,
back.
so that's all right.
Thank you.
All right. Anyway, so the first thing that you need to know about smart cities is that if you don't have a landscape or a diagram of your city with these little floating bubbles hovering somewhere in the sky, you're probably not a smart city, because when I looked on Google Images to find a nice graphic, these are literally like the only pictures that come up. So if you don't have that, I would imagine that you are not living in a smart city. And I know you can't see what these little graphics are, or what the words are underneath them, but they're little pictures showing solar panels, traffic signals, light bulbs. Some of them have cameras, clouds, those bars indicating a Wi-Fi signal. Some of them even have factories and little trucks and things like that. Google Images and just the internet in general is littered with images that look exactly like this. They all look the same. And when I look at them, the themes that I'm kind of drawing out from this image are that whoever designed the artwork is probably trying to convey that all the technologies will be connected somehow. You see that a lot of them have the lines pointing down to the city, and a lot of them have lines pointing from bubble to bubble. So that kind of lets me know that regardless of what form the technology takes, that it will be connected to other technologies in some form or fashion. The second thing that I noticed is that the technology will be comprehensive in that it covers a whole bunch of different areas. The light bulbs, I take them to mean that it's a smart investment in some sort of energy. The traffic lights obviously indicate like traffic. Sustainability is typically represented by like a solar panel or a sun or something to that effect. And then you have some other more complex, higher level topics like security, enforcement, communications, logistics. The little factories, I think that they are trying to indicate or convey economic growth, shipping, and more. If you really study these pictures, another thing that you'll notice is that all of the images show a super clean background and a super simple rendering of what the city looks like. And notably, if you zoom in and look as closely as you can, you will see that there are no people in any of these graphics. In fact, in most of the plans and research that I read through, smart cities are kind of defined or described as an imaginary version or an ideal of the urban landscape. So it's pretty interesting that in all of these renderings, albeit that they're artistic, there are no images of people. A smart city also is, within the description of what a smart city is, it's also kind of implied that there's a social faith in technology and a desire to innovate. Innovation principally for the purpose of improving the quality of our lives, and some of the descriptions that get a little bit more detailed and explanatory talk about improving the quality of our lives through frictionless transactions, making it easier to pay for services or order services or to deliver them in the case of public agencies. In doing this research, I came across a lot of different definitions and descriptions for what a smart city is, so many that I didn't really feel it was necessary to boil it down into one definitive example or description of a smart city. But in the case of definitions and descriptions, in just about all of them, the imagery that they evoke conveys a simplicity, but it's simplicity for the sake of not showing all the complexity. I think that they really want people to accept the technology, but maybe not understand what goes into it. There's also some descriptions that right off the bat let you know that a smart city is going to be complex. Connecting things is going to require a ton of energy, a ton of resources, and a ton of effort. And then in other descriptions of smart cities that I found, they kind of treat the city as more or less like a red carpet to showcase the latest technologies. And in others, to varying degrees of completeness, science and technology being integrated directly into the urban form. And a lot of the information that I found was specifically talking about things like 5G towers being integrated and mounted on buildings, and others are like traffic cameras that are resting upon traffic signals. In researching where smart cities, the term or the concept originated, the very first example that I came across was from a book called New Atlantis by Sir Francis Bacon. And if anyone wants to guess what year this was published in, go ahead and leave it in the chat. Oh, I have it on the PowerPoint screen, so forget it. But it was almost 400 years ago. This book, I did not take the time to read, but it was the first example of science integrating within the urban form. So the book is about advancing and promoting science and technology as the instrument by which humans control nature and kind of like bring it into the city. The book is about Ben Salem. It's a city region that's controlled by a community of scientists who work for this institution. And the city is just like more or less a laboratory for exploring all these new technologies and doing science experiments for the purpose of making the city a better place. The book is categorized as a utopian fiction, but of course, you know, that was a really long time ago. Since then, we have a ton of examples that you can probably look to that that contain either a smart city, like an advanced technology sometime in the future, or even just like individual technologies. Some that I look to, these are kind of like low effort examples that I found. One is on the far left, it's a book called Stand on Zanzibar, and that book discusses electric cars. It's actually from the late 60s. Knight Rider, as many of you are probably familiar with, I think that show was in the 80s, maybe early 90s, and the car kit was an artificial intelligence automobile. And even further back, we want to look to like the early 60s, I think. The Jetsons show people what tech could do to transform our cities and our lives almost 60 years ago now. But all those examples are pretty old, pretty dated. What I want to do is tell you what the literature and what some of the transportation and other city plans, it will show you the way that they're discussing smart cities currently. So two of the examples I found, one is from Smart Columbus, and many of you may know that in 2016, Columbus won the Smart Cities Challenge. They got awarded $40 million from the US DOT and another 10 from the Paul Allen Foundation. And their stated goal of transforming Columbus into a smart city was to improve the quality of life of its citizens. They also had some secondary goals like driving economic growth, providing upward mobility, becoming a nationwide leader in logistics, and doing this all sustainably. Total polar opposite in terms of like how cities are laid out is Dubai, which is in the UAE. Dubai has a smart initiative called Smart Dubai, and it's led as a goal-oriented smart city initiative, which I kind of like. I think that there's a lot of overlap between what the city of Dubai and the city of Columbus are trying to achieve. The Prime Minister of Dubai said that the goal of the city in, in seeking out these smart cities technologies is that he wants the city to be the happiest place on earth. And a lot of their initiatives support that goal, strictly speaking from the perspective of government. So one of the first initiatives that they kicked off with this Smart Dubai program is to have the public sector go totally paperless. 2021 is the last year that they're going to be using paper for water bills and other city services like taxes and driver's license applications and things like that. From here on out, all of the payments, all of the arrangements, all of the scheduling will be done virtually or digitally, I should say. So this is them also taking an opportunity or using an opportunity to demonstrate what blockchain technology can accomplish if it's used by the public sector. Currently, most of the examples that we have for demonstrating what blockchain can do is private sector. So this is like their opportunity to conform it to meet the city's goals. Another part of the Smart Dubai initiative is to really streamline government services. The Prime Minister said that the goal for the next 5 years will be to have only one government department. So it's more or less going to be the headquarters where everything is handled vertically. So no more go here to get your license, go here to pay your water bill, go here to file a plan amendment. Everything is going to be conducted under one roof. So this one agency will handle all city services. Another thing that's inherent to the modern concept of a smart city is data collection and analysis. A lot of the examples that describe a smart city focus way too much on the technology, I think. A lot of them focus on goals, which I think is more appropriate. But the best example I've found is discussing how data will be used to inform public sector decisions. So I found this chart online and I really like it because whereas a lot of the other ones, only highlight the technologies and totally ignore what happens or what the technologies are used for, this one really conveys that the purpose is to facilitate learning and use information to make smarter decisions about how the city exists and how the city works. And of course, take that one step further to talk about how decision makers are serving the community in a smarter way. So again, that point's often not even mentioned in presentations about smart cities or very few, if any, of the documents that are available online. As far as how the smart city model works for city services, whether we're talking about water management, parking, traffic management, land use, any of that, the way that I kind of envision the smart cities process is by you have this government agency that provides a service to residents. Data is collected about that transaction and about the reaction or about the behavior that occurs as a reaction of providing that service. Data is then collected through a system of either monitoring or sensors. The data is transformed into information through an analytical process, and then the information comes back to the government agency, and then they use that to adjust the way that they deliver services. And we can see examples of that throughout our agency for sure, and throughout a lot of other agencies as well. To just like generalize it, I think the smart cities process means that you have an ongoing effort to optimize your business processes. And of course, to optimize, you have a lot of needs in the system. If we're going to monitor human behavior from afar, we need sensors, we need cameras, that requires energy to power, and you need human capital to monitor, to acquire the data and draw insights, although that's changing a little bit with things like artificial intelligence and cloud computing. Once you have the information, you need a way to convey the insights to folks who can make decisions to change the business practices or processes. We have a lot of these tools at our disposal already. We were just in a meeting with the PSST team yesterday, and we were talking about Microsoft Business Insights, I think it's called. Others might be familiar with Tableau. And on a way more rudimentary level, we have tools like PowerPoint that can help us convey information to decision makers. So once they're armed with this knowledge, they can decide what's the best way to deliver services to our customers, i.e. the citizens. And then that cycle continues over and over again. So there are implications to managing a city. There are a lot of implications of making your city smarter in the way that I've just described. We already talked about the need for certain things like sensors and maybe camera equipment and maybe tools to help you do the data analysis, tools to visualize the information. A lot of these processes can be handled instantaneously with big programs like I think it's IBM that has Watson, some of the cameras that can do video analytics are all one big subscription service that you pay into in the case of traffic monitoring. So clearly there's a huge need for technology like the monitoring devices, computing devices, and so on and so forth. There's also a huge need for human capital to run this and to ensure that we're measuring the things that are most appropriate. So if that feedback mechanism is working properly, then we as a government agency have a huge opportunity to continue improving service delivery, and we can also measure and continue to improve how we're doing in terms of achieving the goals of the community. To talk more specifically about the implications of what smart urbanism is and what it means, we have a huge opportunity here to streamline our service delivery process and make it way more efficient. We can also use technology to operate in a far more sustainable manner if we're building the system correctly. And I know I'm speaking in very general terms, but most of my experience originates in the transportation space. So a lot of the devices that are currently powered by like plugging it into a wall, well, solar panels have an opportunity to make a lot of this more sustainable. But to accomplish the dual goals of being more efficient and more sustainable requires a lot of information technology, a lot of engineering, and in the case of some technologies, it can require way more data than we have access to, and to power the system may require more energy, at least initially. So to kind of summarize everything that I've just said, smart cities plans and projects have made a whole bunch of promises to the public without a lot of detail or description about how we're going to achieve these promises or meet them. If we design a city in a particular way with smart sensors and using smart grids and big data networks and all of that jazz, we're letting the public know that we have invested in technology and we believe or expect that it will make city services more efficient. And that relationship has not always been clear in the initial smart cities plans that were delivered. Like I mentioned before, a lot of them seem to just want to showcase technologies and more or less just let the public know that these technologies exist. But now we have transcended that initial period, and I think the citizenry is becoming way more knowledgeable about what technologies exist, and they're starting to think about how they can be used to transform their lived experience. There is, of course, an implication with all of this that technology can lead the goal-setting process rather than the other way around. And on our team, Lionel has been one of the most, well, he's been a huge cheerleader and a big proponent of thinking about things in the correct way to avoid having the technology lead the process. He's always reminding us that we shouldn't fall in love with any technology and that before we invest money, we have to find a reason to use the technology instead of the other way around. But doing things the other way is a problem that's kind of prolific in the smart city space. And it has been rightly criticized by many in the academic literature and practitioners. Some of the primary critiques that I came across when I was doing some research on what it is to be a smart city, well, there's three generally, but the first one that I want to talk about is there are a lot of concerns about whether technology is just looking for a problem to solve. That critique is very, very prevalent in all this literature. It kind of goes hand in hand with one of the critiques that's discussed more in academic literature, which is about subjecting cities to corporate governance, meaning that major corporate players may want to use public resources and public spaces to create their own particular vision of the future for the sake of profit making. Along the spectrum of folks who are concerned about corporate governance, there's a lot of people who criticize it, like for what I just said, that it's just a profit-making venture for a lot of these tech firms. Others have expressed concern that, what's the word, like technocratic governance might treat citizens more as data points or transactional numbers rather than as real people. Others might see corporate governance as like a dystopian system of mass surveillance or something like that. That critique is widespread throughout the literature. The second critique that I want to go over is that a lot of people see smart city planning as incompatible with traditional notions of what the city is, mostly that cities are informal meeting spaces where any interaction could happen at any time and that life is a little bit more spontaneous, postmodern, if you will. People see renderings of smart cities that look like the ones that I've shown on the page. These renderings are actually a little bit better than the ones I showed you a moment ago because at least there's people in here. But they see renderings of the city and urban spaces, and it looks like there's a huge effort to just order people, especially if you look at the picture in the upper right-hand part of the slide. It really does look like, that's not a future that I want to live in. It reminds me of iRobot or something weird like that. So a lot of people have criticized smart city planning as more oriented or more focused on the technology rather than on the needs of people. And I totally buy into that. I think there's a huge trapping that we want to avoid falling in, which is falling in love with the technology and forgetting that we're here to serve people. The last critique that I want to mention is that tech deployment has a really great potential to benefit society, but it also has the potential to reproduce or exacerbate existing social and urban inequalities. The more emphasis that we put on developing a smart city, the more we're leading the public to expect that the technologies and the approaches and the plans that we're putting forward will yield better results than non-tech or more traditional approaches to solving these same urban problems. And that's not always the case. I can think of a few really good examples of how technology has positively impacted certain segments of the population while ignoring or even negatively affecting others. The Smart City project in Columbus, Ohio that I mentioned earlier has several good examples of projects and programs that seemed really innovative, but they didn't deliver the results. Just to mention one, there was like a prenatal ride service that they wanted to fund with the Smart Cities grant, and for whatever reason, I'll have to go back and look at the example if you want details, but it was not successful at all. So that was considered a failure of the project, and it's not moving forward once the initial grant funds run out. Another good example of the technology exacerbating problems is smart parking systems. We have these throughout downtown Tampa and downtown St. Pete. Most urban areas have some sort of a parking management system. It makes it really easy for you to pay for parking. It makes it easy to reserve parking, and all of these great benefits to those who have a smartphone and a data plan and a bank account. Without any one of those three things, you can't participate in the smart parking system. You have to use the traditional means of paying, which is like going to the little box, putting in your credit card, which assumes, number one, that you have a credit card, and purchasing a paper ticket that you put on your dashboard. So the benefits are clear for those who have the prerequisite things to participate, and totally ignoring other folks who do not have those amenities or benefits, I guess you would say. We even have a good example of technology exacerbating inequalities in our agency. About a year ago, when the pandemic first kicked off, we were discussing ways that we could get the public to participate in virtual meetings. We had to do that because we didn't want to have people in a confined, closed space during the middle of a pandemic. But while we were exploring opportunities for people to participate, we quickly realized that unless they have internet access or a phone plan, they're not going to be able to participate in the decision-making process. So I bring that up because I think it's really important for us to always be mindful of the equity dimension of deploying this technology, especially if the technology is cutting edge and if it hasn't been around long enough to be studied thoroughly. There's a huge potential for it to just reproduce inequalities that we're trying to minimize. That was a lot to take in, I understand. I'm not trying to say that our approach to smart cities planning has resolved or avoided all of these critiques. I'm not trying to say that what we're doing is path leading and that we found a way to avoid all the trappings of previous plans. But I think it is really important that our plan is mindful of equity and lead with that. In fact, we don't want to exacerbate inequalities, and we don't want to facilitate any of the things that people are really scared of, like mass surveillance or identity theft or losing their privacy. We're trying to be mindful of all of those things throughout the planning process. One way that we are attempting to overcome those trappings is by welcoming critiques. So I spent a lot of time letting you know about these critiques because I really want you to let me know if you see us falling victim to any of those things that we're trying to avoid. We're welcoming them and actually encouraging them. So in the outreach that we have done, we've been very upfront about a lot of the problems associated with deploying technology. And over the next few slides, I'm going to take a little bit of time and explain to you what our approach has been to doing this Smart Cities plan, and then briefly cover some of the details of what that plan includes. And a more complete draft of the Smart Cities plan is going to be made available on the website, probably wrapping that up around mid-August. So the background of our Smart Cities plan update is twofold. Number one, our current Smart Cities plan doesn't exist. Before Smart Cities plan became the Smart Cities plan, we had an ITS plan, which stands for Intelligent Transportation Systems. That plan was last updated back in 2013, and clearly tech has changed a lot in the previous 8 years. I took screen grabs of like the hottest consumer tech that was released in 2013. I'll give someone a candy bar if they can go into the chat and let me know what all of these things are. There's like a video game system that was like the highest winning or the highest earning product on one of those like Kickstarter, I think. And there's a very rudimentary smartwatch up there. So type that in the chat if you can remember any of those products. So the first reason is because we don't have a Smart Cities plan yet. The previous version that could be more or less considered a Smart Cities plan was done in 2018. We also felt that in addition to updating the previous version, we wanted to produce an update that is serviceable to not only the TPO, but to the wider region. So the background context that we're working with is that there is a new group, relatively new group, called the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance. That group is led by FDOT, City of Tampa, and Qatar at USF. It's a group that has a lot of tech-oriented and tech-interested public and private sector folks attend. The meetings are held quarterly, and we talk about very specific topics that are relevant to our area, more or less projects that are going on currently. We want to produce a Smart Cities plan that could serve as a strategic guide for how we order our investments in this space, with the goal of improving safety, enhancing accessibility and mobility, and of course, doing that by deploying cutting-edge technologies. The Smart Cities Alliance was created in 2018 to begin working on transforming this region into a smart region or a smart city. It's a little bit of a misnomer because the group is regional. Before the Alliance existed, there was just a whole bunch of talk about making the region smarter, but not a whole lot of doing. So once this group was created, we set the mission statement specifically oriented it toward action. So the very first workshops we had were called I2A, turning ideas into actions. And as part of that action-oriented focus, we created 3 action tracks. And the Alliance's goal is for 3 people to manage, 3 individuals to manage one of these tracks. I manage the data and analytics one. And we use our meeting time to think through what some of the new challenges are specific to each one of the action track, and then brainstorm projects and kind of like accelerate them, if you will. Our approach to developing this smart cities plan is to not tell people what a smart city is. We really wanted to be open to hearing from the public and from other agency staff what they think the defining characteristics of a smart city should be. So rather than creating this vision up front and finding ways to execute our vision, we identified what we consider to be a smart cities approach. It basically means that we don't yet know exactly what our vision is going to look like. We're putting the onus on the community, and then once we hear from them, we will go seek out the technologies that can help us achieve that vision. So in speaking with the public, asking them what they think a smart city is, the only guideline that we created was that it should use existing and emerging technologies for the goal of improving safety, mobility, and just very generally quality of life. And it's up to the citizens to tell us what quality of life improvements they need. Other than that, which is just the basic criterion for which we can accept feedback, we don't really have any expectations for where this plan will lead us. We kicked it off by doing a lot of background work, reviewing dozens of smart cities plans from around the world, mostly focusing on medium-sized cities in the US. And once we had all of those plans, we took an inventory of the tech and the initiatives that were listed in each. And once we had that list, we created fact sheets documenting the technologies that are going to be deployed to help those cities achieve their vision. Once we had all of those technologies listed in an inventory, we made a prioritization tool to rank them according to what our community needs are as identified in the 2045 long-range plan. And lastly, 2 other things that we're working on as part of this plan update is to create a map of the existing deployments so we can show staff, number 1, but the public as well, what is already out there, because a lot of folks would be surprised at the amount of tech that's deployed on our network. And then secondly, we're creating a vision map based on feedback, like I already mentioned, so that we can show the community what the desire is, what they want to see the smart city become. Again, so after we created that inventory based on the projects and initiatives listed in the plans, we put them into a fact sheet booklet. And this is really helpful. It's really oriented toward the public as well as planning staff that may not be in this space as much, to help explain what these technologies are, what they do, where they've been successfully deployed. This should be a really helpful resource for all of you and the public, of course, helping you all get acquainted and a little bit more comfortable with these technologies so you can speak about them in an informed way. This has been really helpful as like preliminary information that we give to folks before we get the feedback, because we didn't think that a lot of people out in the community would understand these technologies well enough to critique them. So we're hoping that they can read about them, absorb the information, think about it, and then come back to us prepared to critique them in a meaningful way. In these fact sheets, or in the booklet, we included about 30 technologies and initiatives. We included case study descriptions, and at the bottom there, we included a chart showing which investment area of the long-range plan each technology can impact. We piloted this by showing the fact sheets to a bunch of high schoolers at Tampa Bay Tech during the Great American Teach-In. After we did the teach-in, which was all day long, so shout outs to Yasser and Bashaka and anyone else who helped. That was a very long experience. They went home and they gave the survey to their parents, and they had a conversation with their parents explaining what they learned about each one of these technologies. So we got a lot of great feedback from that. We also have shared this with some agency staff, and we've made it available to the ITS committee. We're making it available now. I understand that this webinar is going to be recorded and we're going to post it online so that we can continue to collect some feedback about these technologies. And once the draft is ready, it'll be placed on our webpage and folks can go there, read through, and email either myself or the consultant their comments. Another thing we did as part of this update was create a new prioritization tool. This prioritization tool was created to help solve a problem that we ran into a lot this year, but also a couple times in the previous years. That problem is that we have a program in our LRTP, an investment program, in our LRTP and our TIP called Smart Cities, which is designed to fund projects that reduce delay and improve traffic flow with tech and operational treatments. The only problem is we have this program called Smart Cities, but the vast majority of the projects that get submitted to us as candidates for funding are very traditional, even more traditional than roundabouts. I just included this pic because I like it, but almost all of the submissions we get are standard intersection improvements. So that's not really what people think of when they hear the term smart city. I'm sure I'll look in the chat box later and I'll see that none of you probably wrote roundabout as a feature of a smart city. But anyway, because just about all of the submissions for that program or for that funding are traditional, the way that we score the projects has to be suited to help us prioritize those traditional improvements. So the thinking here is that if we ever want to start deploying new smart cities technologies that are more cutting edge, we need to come up with a new way of evaluating them. So it came up a couple times in the previous few years and a couple times this year. So we have this program that's dominated by traditional improvements. It makes it really difficult to evaluate traditional intersection improvements against things like a bus tracking system or a parking management system, electric vehicle chargers, or a mobile payment system. Those are the kinds of things that the public thinks of when they hear the term smart cities. And so it was a huge problem that our performance measures weren't oriented to evaluate those kind of things. And in fact, when we got project submissions from some of our partners, we had to score them. And using the other scoring system, they landed at the very bottom of the list, which clearly isn't right. So moving forward, we have this new prioritization tool that's going to help us rank and prioritize smart cities technologies. We're still going to have the traditional metrics, which are shown on the left-hand side of the screen, because those are very good metrics for evaluating traditional stuff. But we're also going to have a new methodology that considers things like cost, implementation time frame, equity, dependencies, risks, limitations. We'll quantify risk severity, look at BC ratio, and strategic value of deploying these technologies as well. So in the future, the process is going to change. We're going to be soliciting each agency to submit proposals to deploy new tech, and we're going to evaluate them using the new methodology. And once we have a list of the top 5 highest scoring smart cities technologies, they're going to automatically earn a place ranked pretty highly among the more traditional projects. And something that Beth and I just discussed yesterday is that we're going to workshop the idea of setting aside a portion of our SU funds specifically to fund these kind of projects so that we can start accelerating deployment of the technologies and more quickly achieve our smart cities vision. I guess that pretty much brings me to the end of my talk. One last thing before we go, as I mentioned earlier, I really want you all to describe to me what your smart city would look like if you had no restrictions, if you could do anything that you wanted, either from the perspective of agency staff or the perspective as a citizen. Let me know what your smart city would look like and then type that into the box. This is the prompt that we gave to our ITS committee just for consistency. I'm opening it up to you all without limitations of budget, but if you're approaching it from the perspective of staff, I'd like you to think about the problem in this way. If I gave you a $10 million budget to invest in smart cities technologies, programs, or initiatives, what would you do? And then maybe type up why you would do that as well. That pretty much ends the presentation. So please take a few moments to type into the chat box and I'll answer any questions if I see any. And I'll unmute you all so that you can participate. Thank you all. Any questions? I got a question from Dana. What do we already have here in Tampa? For example, I always wonder which intersections have smart timing schedules and the like. So that's the purpose of us creating that smart cities map to chart out where the existing technologies and deployments are. That information is not readily available. In the past, when I've had to look it up, you have to go agency to get to understand their plans or to get access to their plans. It really kind of depends. Temple Terrace does not have its own ATMS, Advanced Traffic Management System, but the city of Tampa does, Hillsborough County does, THEA does, FDOT definitely does, and Plant City does. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all corridors are optimized with signal timing. So to answer your question about which intersections are synchronized, it's not so easy yet, but it will be easier to answer once this project is wrapped up. And then of course, we'll add that shapefile somewhere on the web so that it's more publicly accessible. Any other questions? Thanks for typing that in chat. I see Rich, he would invest in MOS, which is mobility as a service, to make it easier to get around without a car. Wholeheartedly agree. And City of Tampa has a pilot underway right now. I'm not sure if they have wrapped up the bidding process, but I know that they were in conversations with a whole bunch of consultants or vendors to bring that sort of pilot program to the area. So I'm really looking forward to that as someone who commutes here from St. Pete. And I see Vashaka saying that she would invest in connected vehicle technology for better signal communications and safety, and also smart parking. Yeah, I appreciate all your feedback. I am going to leave this open for a while. Of course, stay tuned. We're going to wrap up this draft and put it on the website within the next like 3 to 4 weeks, maybe even a little bit sooner than that. And I'll send out a link to everyone, and you all can do your part by forwarding the report and forwarding the survey to all of your friends. We're going to do some targeted social media buys to continue to get feedback, because I promised the county commissioner that we would really pay a lot of attention to the equity component. And so to fulfill that promise, we need to speak with as many people in the real community as possible. All right, I guess that's it. So thank you all.
Thank you, Johnny. We did post in chat the page for Smart Cities. And again, we'll be posting a copy of this webinar, a fact sheet about various technologies, as well as a survey, and then the draft document. And from mid-August through mid-September, we hope to get lots of feedback and hope you'll share the information. And we appreciate your time today. Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah, but thanks for having me, Lynn.